The Salem witch trials is a well-known historic event. The town of Salem was caught up in a whirlwind of mass hysteria, and that was the cause of the tragic events that took place in Salem in 1692. Mass hysteria is defined as the common term used to describe a situation in which various people all suffer from similar hystericals. Puritan belief is that witchcraft is defiant against God, and those who practice dark magic should be put to death. The people living in Salem were Puritans, and they were very fearful of God, and they believed that if someone was practicing witchcraft and was not put to death, that God would then punish them. In a passage found in the ancient law of Hebrews, Exodus 22:18, one reads, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." I would like to point out where and when this mass hysteria began. When 11 young girls began to suffer from unexplainable illnesses and mysterious things began to happen to them, questions were brought up and everyone wondered what was happening. The first two girls to suffer from erratic behavior was Betty Paris, the daughter of the Reverend, and Abigail Williams, Betty's cousin. They would go into screaming fits and bark like dogs. They stopped speaking and went into seizure-like convulsions. Many people began to speculate witchcraft and dark magic was to blame. Now, looking back from the perspective of someone living in that time that these events took place, it would be logical to think that witches were the cause of all the unexplainable things happening. After the investigation began and the girls were examined, and the doctors could not find any physical thing wrong with them, the people of Salem concluded that witches were among them. And instead of thoroughly evaluating each girl individually, they were oftentimes evaluated together. And the girls would team up. The girls blamed people in the town for cursing them and putting spells on them. This is when the mass hysteria got worse. The group of girls were questioned by authorities, where they began naming off people who had cursed them and used dark magic. The people in the town of Salem believed they were living among witches and were sure God was going to punish the whole town if the witches were not caught and put to death. The reality of this tragic event was the town of Salem had indeed fell under a spell known as mass hysteria. Not one person was unafraid, and even if they thought the girls were lying, they had too much fear in them to speak up. Once the girls said they had been victims of dark magic, the whole town began to think that way. During the trials, the accused were brought in questions, and when one of the accused would move a certain way in the meeting house, other people in Salem would say they were being tormented. If the accused looked at someone, they say they were being attacked. An example of this is when a Rebecca nurse was brought in to be examined in front of a large crowd. Whenever she moved, people complained of being tormented. If she leaned back, it was their backs were broken. If she leaned against the bar in front of her, their breasts were bruised. The people in the town of Salem grew more and more afraid of what was happening around them. One person after another was accused, and the girls did not just accuse servants. They accused the elderly and sick as well. No one was as safe from the mass hysteria that was taking over the town. It spread like wildfire, and no one was able to stop it for nearly a year. Once someone was accused, the people in the town went right along. If someone questioned the girls or made the suggestion that something other than paranormal events were taking place, it did not take long for the girls or someone else in Salem to accuse that person. Hysteria swept through Salem during this time. It was like a disease that took a hold of people living there. Out of fear, many people went along with the girls. One of the girls did try to change her story at one point during the trials, but when she started talking to the authorities, the other girls turned on her and she reverted back. Fear took over because the young girl was afraid that someone would accuse her. She tried to tell the truth, but she was scared back into deceit and lies. The cycle of hysteria continued on as accused pled guilty even though they were innocent. An example of this is when Tituba, the reverend servant, was questioned. At first she expressed her innocence and tried to explain to the authorities that she was just playing a game with the girls, and that she had never used dark magic. But the more she was questioned, the more fear she felt, and after being threatened and pried at for hours, she finally agreed that she had used witchcraft, and she had blamed this on the devil and told them that he told her if she would be a witch, that he would send her back to her home in Barbados. More than 200 people were accused by the girls, and with half the town in fear and the other half just throwing out accusations to answer the unexplained, the people of Salem were torn. Paranoia and fear led the whole town into mass hysteria. The town was in a state of confusion and panic. Those who believed the girls believed out of fear, and those who did not believe either stood by in silence, afraid of being accused, or spoke up and ended up being questioned. There was no way out of the turmoil. When the authorities began to question the girls, it was too late. The whole town had already been consumed, and there did not seem to be an end in sight. As the year turned into 1693, the governor's wife was accused, and he ended the trials. The mass hysteria began to lose its influence, and the trial stopped. After 20 people and 2 dogs were murdered, the nightmare ended. Mass hysteria is a strange, complex thing. It can take hold of large amounts of people in a matter of minutes. In the case of the Salem witch trials, all it took was a group of young girls to cause an uproar. Innocent people lost their lives because the town of Salem fell under the influence of mass hysteria.